Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy, a podcast devoted to understanding how men and women get caught up in the systems of patriarchy, Christian nationalism, and the far right. For years, these have been on the fringe, but now they're mainstream. They've come from places like Moscow, Idaho, and are influencing churches, families, schools, marriages, and institutions across the country, and now in Washington, D.C. Every Monday, I interview experts in the fields we focus on, whether they be authors, reporters, other podcasters, academics, professors, former members of these groups, and more. Our companion podcast, They Called Her Bitter, amplifies the stories of survivors and the advocates who come around them, detailing how the ideas we talk about here impact real lives. Because what was done in the dark will be dragged in the light. Today, we talk to Dr. Warren Farrell, who is an American author, educator, and activist widely regarded as the father of the men's movement. Initially a prominent figure in the second wave feminist movement, his career evolved to focus on the unique challenges facing men and boys in modern society. Dr. Farrell also lectures for Jordan Peterson's Academy on the crisis young men face, the boy crisis, and is also on the board of directors for Dr. Peterson's Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. He's the author of The Myth of Male Power, The Boy Crisis, Why Men Are the Way They Are, The Liberated Man, and more. In this episode, we talk about the crisis facing boys in America, economic problems, being a male feminist, correcting myths on power inequities, what women are looking for in men, male identity, and more. Let's get into it. All right, well, welcome to Sons of Patriarchy, a podcast that is focused more particularly on Christian nationalism and church abuse and patriarchy, but broader focused now on crisis of masculinity, red pill ideology, the manosphere and stuff, and a deeper look into this, both on the positive and the negative side, to try to figure out what's going on with men in America today. Not saying men are the problem of all things, but we want to look, me being a man, and to talk to other men who are trying to figure out how do I fit in society? How do I figure this thing out? How do I move and have my being here? But we have Dr. Warren Farrell, who you guys have already heard about because we had an intro, but thanks so much for coming on and talking to us on Sons of Patriarchy.
I'm looking forward to it.
So, first question, and I'm guessing you get asked this quite a bit, but this is more, we'll call it macro level. And you told me before recording you've been writing on this for 50 years. What got you interested? I mean, you're a male, I'm a male, so there's kind of a baseline understanding of this, but what got you interested in writing on masculinity in the first place? What did you see 50 years ago that you're like, you know what, I'm gonna start talking about this, writing on this, analyzing this, and then maybe as you talk about that, some changes you've seen along the way, having researched this for as long as you have.
No, let's see. Ironically, I started out with being involved with the National Organization for Women. I was on the New York City board of the National Organization for Women, and they were debating having kicking men out of the organization because they had these things called consciousness raising groups, which were helping women become more aware of the different ways that a feminist perspective affected their personal life. And so during the debate, some of the people said that, whenever men who attended the National Organization for Women meetings attended, during the consciousness raising sessions, the women were oftentimes feeling, inhibited by men being present, that they really couldn't speak their mind. And so, and that argued for getting rid of men, especially during that period of time. And so the leadership said, well, why don't we have this Warren Farrell guy start a men's groups that meet simultaneously to the women's groups, and that gets the men out of the women's hair. And so I did that. And, at the beginning, because I was doing my doctoral dissertation and a book on these issues, I was explaining to these male feminists how to be even more male feminists. And I wasn't doing a very good job of listening. But then I started to change my attitude and sort of ask more questions and listen to the answers. And I was hearing man after man, sort of, I would hear things like men earn more money than women do for the same work. But I was in the men's groups I started both in with now, and then went very well, and so I started starting them other places. I was hearing again and again, men once they became dads often gave up what they wanted to do what they felt they needed to do to earn enough money to supply income for the family to be able to move into a better school district, which usually meant a more expensive home, and usually meant that if they were a musician or an elementary school teacher or an artist or a writer, they couldn't make a living for the most part doing things like that were their passion. So I remember one man in one of my men's groups. He was one of these sweetheart of a guys, and he was an elementary school teacher. And every time we met in the men's group, he was talking about how much he loved the kids. But then he had his wife, and he decided to have a child. And as soon as she got pregnant, to devote full time to raising the child, and he realized that they needed to move into a better home and a better school district, the children could have a good education. So he gave up being an elementary school teacher, which he loved, and agreed to become a principal superintendent of schools, which he absolutely hated. He hated administration and all the pettiness and fighting and stuff like that. And he was really unhappy that way, but he was happy he was able to provide about twice as much income as he could as an elementary school teacher for his family to have more opportunities than he had, or at least his child, his future child, to have more opportunities than he would have had if he had stayed as an elementary school teacher. And I started seeing this again and again. And here and now we're saying, that men in education are the minorities, but they're the majority as principals and superintendents of schools. And this just goes to show you how men are the oppressors, and that they figure out ways of becoming dominant. And I saw through these experiences that, wait a minute, this was not oppression that he was after. He was willing to give up what he loved to do in order to do what he felt he had to do, that he liked a lot less, in order to give his daughter, in this case, a daughter, opportunities that he never had, or that he would have had if he had stayed with being an elementary school teacher, or other guys, musicians and artists and writers and actors. But I started seeing man after man give up what they really love to do for what they for this. And so I started to disagree with some of the perspectives of the feminists, that it was all about male power, male patriarchy, and that type of thing. I said, this is about male sacrifice, and we should not be calling it male power and patriarchy and men as oppressors. And so when I started articulating those types of things, I got in a little trouble, and my income went from enormous to about one hundredth of what it had been.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting that you point this out, because I'm trying to think back to my childhood and formation and sort of the narratives that I had been told, even from my dad, my father, growing up, and then knowing what he did. He didn't go into his work, if I remember right, because he loved it. It's because that's what he had to do in order that. So I remember this narrative growing up,
What type of work did he do?
that he's retired now, but he was a real estate appraiser.
Hmm.
And he went to school and got his MBA in finance from a pretty prestigious school, and I think wanted to be a lawyer after that, because he was smart. I think he took his LSAT too. So he was going to do a bunch of education. Um, but then the narrative and the kind of the pressures on him, like you were talking about, was like, no, you need to provide for your family. You need to provide for them now. And so he left his dream of becoming a lawyer, because I guess for him it was less stable, and there was less prospects. unless he went to a really good law firm. And he didn't want to do another 3 or 4 years of school and then have an internship that was going to be really low paid. I think he found whatever the whatever the former like form of Craigslist was, found a job as a real estate appraiser in San Francisco or something, and
Mhm.
then they eventually moved back down to Orange County. He married my mom, and then had me a few years later. But it's interesting that you say this because that is something I remember. And even if people don't agree with you, it's like, well, men are the oppressors, and that's always been the case. I think that if we were honest with ourselves, we do remember our saying something like this, like, I don't do what I want, I do what I have to in
Right.
order to provide
Yes.
for this family.
Yes. When I was in graduate school, I wrote a book on the students and university governance for NYU, which is where I was going to school. And the head of the American Language Association saw it and said, "I want you to, to ghostwrite a book that I'm doing." And that was so I got a sense that I had some I guess gifts in the area of writing, and so I talked about this with my father, and he said, Warren, only one out of about 100 people who are writers find a publisher, and if you can't find a publisher, you'll never find a wife. And, and
Okay.
and so as you said, it was like you don't do what you want to do. And, and in my groups, I was in New York City. And so in the men's awareness groups, there were, so many men who were, the ones that were single were oftentimes musicians, artists, writers, actors. And the actors were usually called waiter, had the same name. They were all trying to sort of do something that they just absolutely love to do. But as soon as they had children, they started to become much more, quote, balanced and doing what they felt they needed to do in order to do the best for their wife and their children. And that, one of the things that was good about being a feminist is that a male feminist is that oftentimes these men married women who were pretty successful in their own
Hmm.
themselves.
Yep.
And my former wife was very successful economically and in other ways, but that what she produced economically, what freed me to be able to do some of the writing of my first book, and now my current wife also is produces a good income and owns her own firm, and that frees me also to be able to write the way I feel is honest, rather than feeling like, oh, this perspective will sell more books. I can
Mhm.
say this perspective is what I think is most accurate, and I can afford to put that out there.
Yep. Yep. So I got a probably not a hypothetical question because I'm assuming you've been asked this before. Um, so let's say a woman hears what you're saying and says, "I understand what you're saying, Dr. Farrell, that a man feels like he can't do what he wants, but has to do what he must do. So it's not necessarily what he likes to do; it's what he has to do or provide for the family. But the very ability to even do that thing, whatever it is that's available for him, is the result of a patriarchal society that he can do. He could become a um, a principal at a high school instead of being a teacher at a high school because it pays more. But he, like, I as a woman wouldn't have access to that same position that he does because I'm a woman, and so sure, it's less fun for him because his desire is to be a teacher, but because he has access to something that I don't have access to, that itself is a result of a patriarchal society.
Yeah, first of all, it's a really good question. Second, never, this is very important piece of information. Never married women who have never had children have earned more than never married men who have never had children since the 1970s.
Interesting. Huh.
Meaning that it is not the absence of that, it is not the lack of availability of a position like being a principal or a superintendent. It is the fact that women who are not focused on their children, they become the principals and superintendents and have for a long time. However, it is true from a feminist perspective that because such a small percentage of women didn't have children and focused on their careers and remained unmarried, especially in the 50s and 60s, many people would say, well, wait a minute, we don't really want to have a woman here as a superintendent of schools or as a principal because, after all, that she's likely to have children, and and then we'll lose her. Especially, this is superintendent of schools where there's a fair amount of rotation, but even her argument would be even stronger, saying like somebody who's being trained to be an apprentice for a period of time in order to become a CEO of a corporation is even more likely to make people say, well, wait a minute, we're going to invest all this training in her. And the moment she gets to be a certain age, like 28, 30, if she hasn't had children already, she's going to have children. We're going to lose her, and our investment in her is going to be lost. And so the reputation of women being likely to take off time to have children did work against women being able to be as advanced as men did. Now, today, with a much higher percentage of women not having children, that is not near, and so many more women doing well as CEOs and in other areas, that is more matched to the percentage of people who are women who want to do those things, is more matched with the opportunities to be willing to do those things.
Okay, that's really helpful. So what do you see? Again, we're saying macro, and then we'll dig into some of these details. What do you see today in terms of being a male in America, dealing with dating, economics, job prospects, whatever? What do you see today that's both similar to and different from what you saw when you were part of the women's organization and when you were kicked out of the women's organization? What are some of those similarities and differences you see, and how has that not morphed and changed, but what has that looked like over the past
Yeah.
few decades?
It's sort of like everything and nothing. And so, so many things have changed. Obviously, we now have, 40% of women who have children without being married. That was a huge difference than it was in the 1950s. And those women who have children without being married usually have um, some of them are living with a man, but the average woman who has a child is just living with a man but not married to him. That relationship lasts only 3.5 years. And so the problem is, what's changed is that those children grow up with a minimal or no father figure, especially their own biological dad. And the children the children that do not have biological dads are almost all of your mass shooters, almost all of your people that commit suicide, almost all of your prisoners are children who grew up without dads, or had what I call dad deprived. Now that has changed enormously. What's also changed is that there's been in all the societies that are developed, the middle and upper middle class do not have to worry as much as our grandparents did, on the issue of surviving. Therefore, we had in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we've had the freedom among developed nations in middle and upper middle classes. We've had the freedom to divorce. And when there's a divorce, very frequently, the women have the right to the children and the dads have to fight for children. And the problem with that is when those children are dad deprived as a result of a divorce and the father wants to be with the children, almost all dads want to be with their children about at least equal amount of time after divorce. But they oftentimes don't get the opportunity to do that because the woman wants the children, fights for the children, and fights for child support payments. And then this often leaves a man, a father, feeling like he's lost his wife, he's lost his children, he's lost everything he loves. And at the same time, he's economically paying out money every month, and finds that he can't attract a new woman because a good part of his money is going out to support the home that he and she bought together, and which is one of the reasons why, and this is another thing that has changed. One of the reasons why men who are in custody battles are 8 times as likely as their former wife to commit suicide.
Okay. And this is like you said, the main difference between the crisis of manhood or masculinity today versus the crisis of masculinity, if there was one 50, 60 years. I mean, what, I guess, was there? I mean, I wasn't born, so I'm unaware, but like, what, was there a crisis of meaning among men, of fatherless among men then, or was it something that's different then, but it reflected the same way then as it does now?
Yes. Historically speaking, almost everyone was concerned. Our grandparents were concerned with one thing, which is surviving. And they didn't have birth control, so every time they had sex, they worried that that there'd be one more child to feed. And so, I teach couples communication workshops called Role Mate to Soulmate, and my last book was on that issue. So, everybody in my workshops, their grandparents did not have the privilege of attending couples communication workshops to learn how to not feel defensive in response to criticism. And so all these things have changed enormously, but we didn't think of it as a crisis because our grandparents just did what they had to do. No one had, this is where feminists really made a mistake. And historically speaking, no one had rights. Everybody had responsibilities. They had obligations. Just like my father said, you can't write a book because you won't find a publisher, and that you won't be able to fulfill your obligations of becoming a father and providing the amount of income you had. And so men's obligation was to just to be willing to die in war. There's Hitler is in the world, and Uncle Sam needs you. And so what do men do? Not do something, oh, we'll sit back and let women take care of killing the Nazis. We were willing to kill and be killed. And all the hazardous jobs, 93% of the people that die in hazardous jobs, construction, logging, trucking, so on, these are men. Volunteer firefighters, almost 100% men. How much do they get paid? Volunteer.
For volunteer, nothing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so historically speaking, nobody sort of worked from their fulfillment, and everybody worked from what they learned from their parents and grandparents what they needed to do to survive. And this is what we totally missed as feminists. We were calling, as I was mentioning before, the principals and superintendents, part of male power, when in fact it was part of male obligation and responsibility, and men empowering their children to have better lives than they had, and this male sacrifice in exchange for the children's power.
Hmm. I don't know if this is the right word to use. Would you call it something close to anachronism, where it's because I forget who coined this, but like the leisure class. It's now that we have the time to think about this, that we're not, like you said, we're not worried about the obligations that we have to hold. We're not worried about survival as much. There's less food scarcity in those who are middle upper class, like that. For those in the middle upper classes, less so maybe for to lower to middle classes. Um, we have kind of the leisure to think about these things, and
Yes.
if you don't, it's not, maybe you just think less of rights and you're like, this is just what I have to do in order to survive.
That's exactly correct. And this is only in the developed nations. In less developed nations, survival is still the dominant issue. And among poorer people, survival is still the dominant issue. But in middle and upper middle classes, That's where all of us feminists came from, the middle and upper middle classes. We weren't, if we were poor economically, we were worried about survival. We weren't going to now meetings to make the world what we thought was better. And we were accusing men of doing all these things that were limiting women, when in fact that was a misunderstanding of what women and men were all about. But one of the things that is very misunderstood um, is the difference between high-paying jobs and low-paying jobs. Men do earn more money than women do, but not for the same work. They earn more money for 25 different choices that they make that lead them to earning more money, but being less fulfilled. Let's work on this for a moment. The less fulfilling a profession is, the more fulfilling a profession is, the more people want to do it. The more
Yep.
people want to be actors, writers,
Makes
musicians, and
sense.
so on.
Yep.
And so therefore the supply outweighs the demand. And so when the supply outweighs the demand, the price of what you can pay somebody doing something very fulfilling is much less. And so do women earn less than men? And as a rule, they earn less than men because they're more likely to pursue things that are highly fulfilling that lots of people want to do. When they, but if they compete if two people compete to be a doctor, and you have the female doctors and the male doctors, the gap in pay is no longer 76 cents to the dollar. It's a few cents to the dollar, but men still do earn more if
Hmm.
they're doctors than women doctors. But if you take that to the next level and you say, suppose both of those doctors are surgeons, now the pay difference is much less. However, if there's both surgeons who have worked an equal number of years, have the equal amount of backgrounds and publications, and have worked for the same type of business, well, males who are surgeons are more likely to be in their own business. People in their own business tend to earn more than people that work for hospitals and so on. When you even all of the 25 most important variables, it is most probable that women, when those variables are even, out earn men. But we don't know that for sure. But what's very clear is that men do not earn more money than women do for the same work. And so I was concerned about that because, from my perspective as a male feminist, if women earned even one penny less than men for the exact same work,
Hmm.
I would be opposed to that because it would reflect an underlying contempt for women,
Hmm.
and that I'm not willing to live with. But when I controlled for all the variables, which I did when I wrote a book called Why Men Earn More and What Women Can Do About It, that's what I found, that it's more probable that women today earn slightly more than men do for the same work.
Hmm. Okay. So I was going to put a pin on this, but I want to actually ask a follow-up question that'll go into education
Mhm.
as well. Again, I'm playing like you said, Mr. Feminist against harsh patriarchal Warren Farrell, who's making points that some people may not like. But what would you say to the arguments that women go after these positions, like you just say, um, less so because they're more fulfilling, I guess, if they thought cognitively, and more so because they've been conditioned to do this. They've been conditioned to, like, okay, you want to be a nurse. Like, women are nurse types, women are teacher types, women are carer types, which pay less. So if you tell a woman, like, oh, you go after these for these reasons, and they say no, I've been conditioned to for those reasons. What would you say to somebody who says something like that?
Yeah, that's also true. People, we tend to do what we're conditioned to do, and also what we see our mothers and fathers do. But that's not the result. That's the result of seeing our moms do this and our fathers do that, and it's the result of being able to feel that, I don't have to train to be an electrician or or do something in the hard sciences, and that's also there's a biological propensity in those directions as well. If you look at all the nations in the world, and especially the ones that are most like Sweden and Norway and Denmark and so on, you nevertheless find that men are far more likely to go into professions that we've been training women for recently that are very mathematically oriented and so on. And it's good that we're doing that training. But it's also very important that we start training men for the caring professions, because the caring professions are things that need men. We need male nurses. We need males to be physicians' assistants. We need males to care for people. And especially since mental health problems are far greater among men, men are much more likely to commit suicide than women do. Men need other men to see to be caring for them as well, and to see that they can do things that make a difference in that way. Because oftentimes, if you're doing something very technical, it is not that gratifying. If you're caring for somebody, we are social beings and human animals, and if we're caring for somebody, we feel, and that person says, you've saved my life, or you've helped me to not be depressed, and so on. That is extremely gratifying to anyone who is doing that.
Mhm.
And but one of the things that's happened today is now women are earning more and more. But when women earn more and more, and they graduate from college to a greater degree now than men graduate from college, but there's a relatively small number of women who graduate from college who say, "Oh, I want to marry a college dropout," or somebody that didn't even come to college with me. Women are still focused on marrying men who are earning men. Women are still focused on marrying men who earn as much or more, or will soon be earning as much as or more. And here's what's missing in that analysis and that way of being for women. What's missing is that many women say to me, "I want to be a have-it-all woman. I want to be like men are. I want to be able to break a glass ceiling. I want to be able to have children. I want to be able to have those children well raised. Men can do that. Why can't I do that?" That's a clear example of discrimination.
Yep.
And the answer is you can do that, but you have to look for a nurturer, connector type of male rather than a male who is a provider, protector type of male. Now, what does it take to look for a nurture, connector type of male? It means you going to a party, and rather than focusing on the man there as a doctor or as a lawyer, looking around for a man who listens and who's asking women questions rather than giving answers. When you see that man who listens, not waiting for him to come up to you, but you going up to him and initiating a conversation, so that you're finding the nurturer connector males and you're seeking them out. And if he's the type of nurturer connector male who's a little bit too shy to ask you for your information, like your phone number, and you're still interested in him, then ask him for the information, and then call him his information, then call him and ask him out. Then you will select from among the men that are available, not the provider protector types, but the type that will be very glad to take care of the children while you are earning more money. And then the next question becomes, is this what men would be willing to do? So that question was finally asked a few years ago by the Pew Research Center. They asked this only of men who were working full time. They said, if you're working full time and you have children, would you prefer to be working full time, or would you prefer to be with your children full time? 49% of men said, "I would prefer, although I'm working full time now, to be with my children full time than I would to be working full time." The point there being that these men are available in huge numbers, but they're not being told by women that they are wanted or desired to be home full time while the woman is working full time. And so, whereas many more men are very open to supporting a woman economically, there are very few women who are open to doing that. And if they do that, the big challenge is that will sometimes see men at work who are earning a lot and then have children, and they start respecting those men more than they do their husbands. And a woman who does not respect a man cannot love a man. And so once a woman feels that lack of respect, the man picks it up. She picks it up. She cannot love him, and he oftentimes, therefore, and the relationship deteriorates. And so these are the things. This is where women need to change to benefit themselves and benefit their children and benefit their being a have-it-all women. And this will also benefit men. Anything that you do to benefit men or women benefits the other sex. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
There's a lot in there. First of all, thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. There's so much in there, but I want to build on and expand something you began with, and that's education, because at least the conversations we're seeing, and these are more in what we'll call them either patriarchal or hyper-patriarchal circles, which they actually talk about the same exact thing you do, but they're saying it's a big problem that women are graduating from college at a higher degree than men are looking for what they'll call them like higher value men, and if men aren't graduating from college, then what what pool are these women looking for? And they're saying that pool is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, so that the upper echelon of men get their full choice of women, and so like the scales are starting to switch, at least in their minds. And so now they're looking at education and they're like, okay, this whole thing just needs to be flattened, destroyed, and rebuilt up again because women are now being um, catered to because they're now going to college more often. They're graduating with better positions. They're going to graduate school, getting their PhDs at a higher rate, or some in some fields a higher rate than men are. And they'll take all of this and say, well, maybe we just shouldn't allow women in college at all because they should just be homemakers. So they're seeing this problem. They're saying the only solution to this problem is we have to flip it back on its head and go to back to where we think it was in the 1800s, 1900s, earlier part where women were a very, very small portion of college graduates or went to college at all compared to men. So with all of this said, in the educational space, are men or boys being educated in high school, in middle school, elementary school, hopefully towards college, if that's what they're going to do, and how the educational system is catering to them or understanding their psychological pressures or their hormonal development, their specific ways of being educated, which may or may not be the same way as women. So long, long question short. What does the education look like? Because we hear this all the time. Unfortunately, this is how my algorithm has played out because this is what I put into the algorithm. Is the solution for what you're describing to take women out of colleges and out of education, or is the solution something different, maybe more focused towards the difficulties boys are having in school?
It is definitely not to take women out of college. We want women to be everything they can be and to be in college and to graduate as often as they, as they can. We want to support women being successful. We want to support women being successful in whatever way they want to be. At the same time, we need to also see what is absolutely true, that women who graduate from college do not, as a rule, want to marry a college dropout and or a high school dropout or so on. Which is why I said what I said a few minutes ago, how important it is for women to see men, just like men are seeing women as being able to graduate from college as often or be top executives. Women also need to see the potential for men being able to be the nurturer, connector, caring men. Men who dads who take care of children full time, the children do extremely well, better than in any other single category of analysis of parents. Then if you're interested in why that happens, the boy crisis is filled with what the differences are between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting and how the children have the best of both. Men have enormous caring potential, just like women have enormous intellectual potential. And what we want from the success of the world is to invite both to get to maximize their potentials. But in the process of doing that, women have to reevaluate what is a man that they can value, and that falls not into only the nurture connector category of valuing those men more, but also men do need purpose, and men do need income, and there's a whole we need to focus on vocational education being much more sophisticated in the United States than it currently is. And men who do get into vocational education, they will be able to make money through 100 permutations of AI and all the things that AI provides and protects and will offer to us. They'll be able to be more likely to be electricians and own or plumbers and do so many things that lead to them earning money. In Japan, about 25% of people go into a vocational education track. The percentage of those who graduate with jobs is 99.5%. When a woman sees a man earning $200,000 a year as an electrician or as a plumber, that does not turn her off. Okay, she says, he may not be Dr. Farrell. He's an electrician that I'm marrying, but he's earning $250,000 a year, or 200,000, or 150,000. And so she doesn't have to face her parents and say, he's out of work and doesn't earn anything, and I'm wanting to marry him because he's a sweetheart.
That's true. Yep. So we haven't talked. So we've discussed this. This is more. I've asked a similar question about women and psychological, social pressures, and some potential conditioning. That I asked this more on the devil's advocate side. Now asking this on the male side. So both on the conditioning, and this is what they've seen their dad do, and this is what their dad has seen their dad do, and their dads do, and also influenced by, you've talked about the waves of feminism, both the good and the bad, and that, and maybe not necessarily the bad, but the misunderstandings and also some potential bad in that as well. Cultural shifts. How has this, all of this, created challenges to where men are both seen, pressured in certain ways, but then also internally we feel like, well, like, can I seek help for this? Like, who do I talk to about some of this stuff? And it's not like TV shows will play on this, and podcasts will play on this, and radio will play on this, and your friends will play on this. Like, women go to other women, and again, this is both a trope and also, I think, very true. Women go to other women and talk about their issues, their problems. Men, like, well, like the joke is we go to talk to each other about sports and what's happening. But if you talk about deeper stuff, maybe this is still true today. I'm not sure about the younger people than me. But where, both sort of, where is this coming from? And is this like driven? Is this societally driven? Is this psychologically driven? Like, what factors play into men not talking to other men and figure out, okay, this is my problem. Are you also going through this too? And not going down the deep route of like, all women are bad. We're never going to talk to them. They have to get out of the schools. They have to get out of education. We don't want to see them in public life. They have to get out of politics, and men have to run the world. Run the world. So how do we like put the brakes on that stuff and say, men, talk to other men about this stuff? But
Yes.
why don't men talk to other men about this stuff?
The most important thing to understand about men is that men historically and biologically have gotten love by not being lovable. So, for example, we've gotten women are far more interested in marrying the officer and the gentleman than the private and the pacifist. So men have, historically speaking, learned that If they're needed in war or they're needed to earn, that they needed to respond and to do it. So let's take a man who goes into the armed services, and is to fight Hitler or whatever. What he learns is let's say he's maybe let's say Jewish, and there's a comment made by the sergeant who's training them in boot camp that's anti-Semitic. And let's say the man raises his hand and says, "Excuse me, sir, but I'm Jewish, and that I think that comment was anti-Semitic. Could you make sure you don't make comments like that anymore? They really hurt me." And the sergeants, what would the sergeant's response be? Oh,
It must be compassionate.
thank you for pointing that out. I didn't realize my anti-Semitism. I'm going to do some introspection about that. I want to read a book about that. Because
Yeah.
could you maybe recommend a book? No, the sergeant was, "Oh, aren't you such a sweet little Jewish boy? Why don't you do 20 push-ups?" Now, why is the sergeant punishing him for being sensitive? Because the war machine does not work with squeaky wheels. The war machine works when everybody there knows you're being prepared to die. And your job is to do anything, including dying, in order to help us beat the Nazis. And so we are not interested in your feelings. We're interested in what you do to steel yourself from your feelings in order to be willing to be killed, if necessary, to save others. And so then, if he does that, he becomes that officer and the gentleman, and not the private and the pacifist, and he's more lovable. He's more lovable because he's not lovable. He's more lovable because he's learned to keep his feelings to himself. Therefore, he's not really lovable in terms of you can see and feel him as a person, but he's that officer and the gentleman who, if a robber comes into the house or you're threatened in any way, he will save your life rather than he will risk his life to save you rather than expecting to be equally approaching that burglar and finding out what's happening in the house. And so, and the same type of thing with the jobs that are all the hazardous jobs. We all have homes. Most of us have homes that we live in. Think of how those homes were started, mostly with chopping wood, but with loggers. That's the single most hazardous job on Earth, is being a logger. And then those logs went from being cut down to going onto long distance trucks that took them to construction sites. Long distance trucking is among the most hazardous jobs. Went to construction sites. One construction worker dies every working hour in the United States. And so we're living in a home that's built based on male disposability. But does anybody appreciate that? No. But the people marry the people who are those loggers, those truckers, those construction workers, because they make more money than people who are in the caring professions for the most part.
Both to toot your own horn and just listening to it, that was one of the more incredible looks at both the psychology of men who are like, hey, I'm really struggling right now, but then don't know how to describe it. But then also what we're seeing in how willing or unwilling men are to describe some of this stuff, because the like you said, the reward has been not to describe it, because not describing it means like the machine can still work.
Mhm.
And if you do describe it, like you said, you are a cog in this thing that doesn't quite fit, right?
Yes.
And so you're both conditioned, but also like, hey, if you do this, like we're gonna lose. I'm sorry to like we're just going to
Mhm.
lose. And it's almost like that mentality is, I don't know if it's hardwired is the right word, but it's been passed down generations in men. Like this is what
It's
you got to do, because this is
it's
what my
been
grandpa did, this is what
it's
his grandpa did,
it's
everybody
been
else.
passed down by men to men and down by women as to what we should seek in men. And yet at the same time, does it produce a man who can't express his feelings? And is that less lovable to the woman? Absolutely, it produces that. But if he is expressive of his feelings and asking for help and saying, where he's feeling depressed and down, he's not usually respected by the woman if he's not also very successful in addition to that.
Hmm. So again, pushing into this a little bit further as we get later into this to this episode, I'd have to assume this is what you might call like one of the more overlooked or not discussed or misunderstood, whatever the word is. I think we assume men are unfeeling, or women feel men are unfeeling, and men are like, well, I'm unfeeling. I don't I don't get the love if I am feeling, or I don't work right if I am feeling, and this is how my dad was, this is how his dad was. Like this is just what a guy does, and I don't know how to act or work outside of this stuff, and that just perpetuates and perpetuates and perpetuates. Um, but if it's this or other factors, what else do you see driving, like you said, male suicide rates, male hopelessness, male insecurity and aloneness, aloofness, the kind of men who are alone in their life and feeling like nobody else is going to love me because I don't provide this. I'm a college dropout. I can't figure out my feelings. I don't know how to talk to women. Like what do you see today as being some of these bigger factors in the male crisis today?
Well, first of all, I mean, a lot of different levels. One level is, when I interview men, and even in high school, they will tell me that when they hear about men, they hear about toxic masculinity. They hear
Correct.
about the future is female. They
Yep.
hear about the male patriarchy and they're part of the patriarchy and they're oppressors and women are oppressed. And it's like even I met a guy that is in high school in the area where I live in Marin County in California, and he gets to an all boys school, private school, and he still learns this about how terrible men are. And then he goes to, there's another guy I interviewed a few days ago, went to George Washington University. And he was learning at George Washington University about, how men are the oppressors and they're part of the patriarchy. And so many of these men are coming up with, I wish I hadn't been born a male. The future is female, not male. And it's really, and it's very depressing for them. And if they do begin to, and especially when at the same time, if they do have children and they, love their children and there is a divorce, that there is, that they're oftentimes the ones that, as I mentioned before, have to fight for the children. And when they oftentimes fight for the children, they lose the money in the process of the fighting, lose the children in the process of the fighting, and feel really depressed to the point that, as I said, 8 men in custody battles are 8 times as likely to commit suicide as women in custody battles. And so, but none of these things are seen and recognized. And so men today feel very unseen and unheard and blamed for things that lead them to feel like depressed. And when when they don't have a dad involvement, they don't see good. They don't have all the bonding that dads do by things like roughhousing and teasing, and so they don't know how to sort of but bond with their dads and then learn how to be strong men, but also sensitive and caring males from their dads. And so that is enormously problematic. Now, if you want to get to the root cause of the root cause of the root cause, the single most important thing that you can do is to learn how to communicate with your partner. And the single best way of learning how to communicate with your partner is knowing how to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. That's what I spent the last 30 years doing with the Role Mate to Soulmate book and courses that I teach. And so when you learn how to hear personal criticism without becoming defensive, your partner doesn't feel like she or he is walking on eggshells. They feel like they can say anything they really need to say and know that they will be heard. The result of that is the marriage is far more likely to be a strong marriage and together. You're also creating a role model for your children to be able to see you being able to handle personal criticism and not only not be defensive, but invite it because you know how to turn it into an opportunity to be more deeply loved. When your children have that as a role model and they see and their parents are doing that, they are far more likely to stay together. When they're not doing that, they're far more likely to divorce. When they're more likely to divorce, they're more likely to be deprived of dads. When they're more likely to be deprived of dads, therefore that's the single biggest contributor to the boy crisis.
Got it. So now thinking of those who are educating and raising men and women who are educating and raising boys in this current climate, like you said, where they'll hear anti-male stuff and crisis masculinity or toxic masculinity or the patriarchy, um, and putting aside truth or falsities in any one of these aspects or any one of these topics. More so thinking, okay, well, if a parent, like, just being honest, if a parent's just like, I don't want my kid to be like a anti-Semitic, I don't want my kid to be racist, I don't want my kid to shoot up other schools, I don't want my kid to become a Hitler worshiper or somebody who's anti-woman, not just like doesn't like women or is fearful or is nervous around them. Because what man is not nervous around another woman when you're growing up and your hormones are raging? But those who are either supportive of or very vocal, like an Andrew Tate type of saying, I like, why would you ever want a woman? Why would you ever want a wife? They just tie you down. So those were thinking like those thoughts and saying, Dr. Farrell, like, I don't want my kid. They're not thinking like, how do I form them and shape them well into everything like this, and we can talk about that. But like their main thoughts are like, I just don't want him to be a weirdo. And maybe that's not the best way for them to put these questions, but my guess is a lot of parents are fearful of that because what you just said, it's the discourse coming around. So what would you tell parents and educators who are like, this is my fear, what do I do?
What you do is start with learning how to communicate. First of all, having a dad and a mom in the home is ideally the best way. Now, I'll spend a moment deviating from that because some people will say, "Well, gee whiz, I'm already divorced. Now, what do I
Yeah.
do?" So
Yep.
here are what I talk about in the Boy Crisis book as the four must do's if you're already divorced or the event of a divorce it being absolutely not preventable. The first is to make sure you have an equal amount of time, mother and father, with the children. Second is that the dad and mom live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other so the children don't have to forfeit a friend's birthday party or their soccer practice to get to the other parent and therefore resent having to go to the other parent. Third is that there's no bad mouthing from mother to father or father to mother that the children can detect or overhear. And fourth is that the mother and father do go to couples communication counseling at least once a month, not to deal with emergencies where people tend to argue quickly because the time is short, but rather to deal with the underlying best intent of the mother or best intent of the father. Though, if you have all four of those things in a divorce situation, the children grow up almost as well as they do in an intact family. However, the intact family is much more ideal, and ideal especially if the father is being made use of as a dad. That is, if the dad, by being made use of as a dad, I mean, in moms and dads, for example, they set different bedtimes for when a child's under dad's supervision, the bedtime is set later than under mom's supervision. But the studies show that the children under the dad's supervision actually get to bed earlier than the children under mom's supervision who has set an earlier bedtime. And so what's that about? The children come up to dad, let's say, or come up to mom at and it's 8:30, the bedtime, let's say, and the child says, "Oh, mom, I can't go to bed now. I haven't done my homework." And mom says, "Well, you could have cut short that phone call that I told you to cut short an hour ago, but I don't want you to it's true, I don't want you to go into school without having done your homework. So, okay, do your homework." Half hour later, the child says, "I've done my homework, I finished it. Can you at least for reward, read me a little something from my favorite book?" Okay, you really should have done the homework before, but all right, yes. And now it's 45 minutes, an hour later. the child coming up to dad who's already been warned about this, the dad is more likely to say some version of, excuse me, but you were on the video game for an hour and a half. You could have done your homework then. It's your responsibility to get your homework done. And if you don't, you're going to go into school without doing your homework. And so dad is more likely to not just set a boundary, that is 9 o'clock versus 8:30, but to enforce the boundary that he sets, even until the child learns that going to dad to try to manipulate him to give me a later bedtime than he originally set is worth nothing. I don't get it from him. So therefore, what am I learning? I am learning the single most important contribution a dad makes to a child, aside from emotional security, which is postponed gratification. That I want to be more on the video game now, but if I am more on the video game now, I'm not going to be able to do my homework. If I don't get my homework, I don't get good grades. If I don't get good grades, I don't get this, I don't get that. I get my computer taken away from me. I get other things that are consequences that matter to me. And therefore, I've got to go back and do the things I don't want to do, like get off this video game and do the things I need to do. That's postponed gratification. And kids that learn that, girls and boys that learn that, are far more likely to do better in school. They're far more likely to do better in sports. They're far more likely to do better in life. If they're a boy, girls are very good at not falling in love with boys who are losers, and so they're more likely to be emotionally satisfied and happy and able to make love without having to go to pornography to do so. And so that's just an example of the type of thing that needs to be done. And the Role Mate to Soulmate book and the Boy Crisis book are filled with examples like this. But that's just an example out of the group.
Yeah, that's great. Now, before my last question, and just because I've seen you on his courses and we talked about this a little bit, I'm curious. This is more just my pure curiosity. You've talked about the boy crisis on the Peterson Academy with Jordan Peterson himself as well. And he has a special pull. At least he's had a special pull since he went viral late 2010s with a lot of men in America, men in Canada, men across the world. And he's asked you to do a few courses and the interview with him. Um, Both like, what have you learned from him as part of this masculinity crisis, and how he's reached so many young men who are now doing, I think, some of the things that you've said, but then also your interactions with him and talking to men who are looking for a mentor like a Jordan or looking for teachings like his, and like, where do I go for something like this? Where do I go for somebody? Let's say I don't have a great male role model in my life. I don't have a great father in my life. The only guy I see is Jordan, and maybe I see some guys who are not worth looking up to, but they at least, like you say, they give me firm boundaries, even if these boundaries, if we look at them, are not very good boundaries, not healthy boundaries, but they're looking for this. So, if you can talk about Jordan's kind of pull on this, but then also those who are looking for somebody like a Jordan, and say, Dr. Farrell, like, where do I go if I don't have anybody else? It feels like a space that is not made for me.
Yes. First of all, I spoke with Jordan yesterday. I'm on the board of advisors of his Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and he was able to speak yesterday. He's been in a hospital for quite a while now. He, normally speaking, doesn't even have the energy and the ability to even be seen and talk right now. He's hoping to recover by the end of June, when we have the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is meeting in London. There'll be about 40,000 people there to sort of talk to you, to to validate what you were saying about the number of people he's drawn. And he is a person, and he's also created something called Peterson Academy, which so instead of just barking at DEI being overdone in universities, he's created an alternative Peterson Academy, which brings in teachers like myself from all over the world that do courses that can be signed up for. So if you're interested in that, just go to my website, warrenfarrell.com rather, and you'll see my email, which is warren@warrenfarrell.com. I couldn't remember anything more complicated, and so they gave me an easy one. And I will send you an hour's worth of the first course I did on the boy crisis, and the Peterson Academy does a fantastic job of editing it creatively and so on. And I'll send you that for free. And you can sort of connect with what Peterson Academy is about. But Jordan has done an absolutely amazing job. I mean, for intellectuals are not, normally they don't go out and create followings that lead to them filling stadiums.
Yep.
And
Not
here,
at all. Yeah.
if I were had a speakers bureau and I got something from an intellectual at a University of Toronto saying I want to fill stadiums, I'd say, oh my goodness, this guy is delusional.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
Jordan has done that and has just contributed to so many people feeling heard in a way that isn't a Nick Fuentes type of way, that isn't an incel way, that isn't a manosphere type of way, that is really constructive, both relationship wise and understanding the importance of fathers, of families, of in his cases faith as well. And so this is really the way to go. So in addition to reading The Boy Crisis and The Role Mate to Soulmate for Communication, get in touch with the Peterson Academy, because it really does. He's a really good man who offers really good stuff.
Awesome. So now my last question, anything else that you want to leave listeners with before we end this? So now and I love this. We talked a lot of positive things we can do instead of just the negative stuff about masculinity, and constructing a positive look at this, because it can get pretty negative pretty fast. At Since Patriarchy, we've talked a lot about the negativity, and our number one criticism has been, what about the good roles? How can we work on this stuff? Looking ahead towards the future, I don't. It's going to sound really strange, but like the future of maleness, the future of masculinity. We've seen, like you said, over the past 100 or so years, where it's been what it's thought about, cared about, which has been not much other than surviving. It's now more leisure, where we have kind of the space to think on this stuff, and it's been less survival. And now, like, okay, now there's more roads available, and there's more stuff that you can do. What are you going to do with this? Not quite as tied tightly to a certain kind of brand or a way of being a man. What do you see, having studied this for a while, and who knows if this is actually going to be the case, but it's always fun to kind of speculate. What do you see as being issues that we should be talking about in masculinity that you haven't seen quite hit the national discourse, and stuff that has, you're like, hey, this is a good step in the right direction?
We need, first of all, women respect men who respect themselves and have thought about themselves and these issues and what they need and want from a woman, and what they need and want and what their value is. No one is attracted to someone who doesn't value themselves. And so much that we have learned in the last 50 years has led to men not valuing themselves. The patriarchy, you're the oppressor, it's this toxic masculinity and so on. And so when you read The Boy Crisis or The Role Mate to Soulmate stuff, learn about yourself that is of value, seeing what, as a dad, you contribute that is not easily contributed by most moms, seeing how you can develop checks and balance parenting so that you can, that the mom and you can work through different ways that you see raising children, for example, and talk to a woman about the value of a man who is not earning as much or maybe educated as much as she is. If you don't know your own value, a woman doesn't even feel respect for you just being a wimp. So study up on this, do your homework, really care, and then get out there, have the courage to take risks, speak up for yourself. Don't think that you're only worthy of a woman if you're paying for her. Understand how to make sure she knows why it's important that you not have to feel like you are obligated to pay in order to be worthy of her company. We pay for the company of people that are superior to us. Starting out from a place of saying, I need to pay for you is a place of inferiority. And so really learn about yourself, learn about relationships, learn about why masculinity has enormous value today, learn about why and how it can change to be a much better, learn about how we need to communicate to women about where they need to go as well as we need to go in order to get the best situation where we're all in the same family boat. As I said before, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And we both have to start progressing together, and we're not doing it in an atmosphere where we're told women are good and men are bad.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Warren Farrell, thank you so much for your time. You're the first one to respond to me when I asked for guests for this upcoming new weekly stuff. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, not just about the history of masculinity, the psychology of education, and how it's been viewed poorly, but also positively. Thank you so much for your contributions, for your research, for your writing. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Of
It's been a pleasure talking to you too. Thank you very much for creating this.
course.